I'm excited to be here, and I want to thank the Allen County Public Library for inviting me and for all that they do for the genealogical community. I want to preface this presentation by saying that I am in no way a military expert. If this presentation piques your interest in learning more about military records, I encourage you to seek out military experts and watch their presentations and take their courses. I'm doing this presentation as a genealogist and a family historian. Those postnomials after my name mean that I should use proper genealogical methods and processes, and it means that I know what they are. Two that are critical to the success of a genealogist are transcription and analysis. I think every document has a story to tell. However, when I started to transcribe draft registration cards, I realized that there were things I was seeing that I didn't understand. Being a curious and persistent genealogist, I started on a journey of discovery and research that I had not anticipated. At first, I thought Google would give me the answers, but no, I had to read books and hunt down government documents to find out the more complete story held in these valuable registration cards. I'm here today to give you the shortcuts to the information that it took me so long to research. I will be giving a brief overview of this subject. If you have an interest learning a little bit more, there's more in the handout, and then you can take courses and learn more from other military experts. So, World War I and World War II draft registration cards. What we want to do is understand what they are and what they contain. So, unless noted, the photos that I'm using in this presentation are from the Library of Congress. So our topics of discussion for today are the genealogical benefits and drawbacks of draft registration cards, the selective service system and the establishment of the draft process, World War I draft registration cards and their unique markings and colors, how to locate them in black and white and color, the World War II draft registration cards and how to locate them in black and white and color. So the genealogical benefits of draft registration cards, which I think the biggest one is you get a birth date and sometimes a place for men born before birth registrations were common. A man's marital status is asked on some cards or may be implied on others, leading to marriage documents or unknown marriages. A permanent address is given that can lead to local records or be correlated with other sources. A personal signature is normally included and can be used to compare to other signatures of same name individuals. And we all know that signatures are just cool. And it brings us that personal connection to that person. And along with that, we have the physical description that's provided that also gives us a much more personal connection to that person in the record. Due to ease of access, they function as a starting point for further military research. And citizenship status is recorded, which can lead to immigration information. So this registration card, I was doing some work for somebody for Adolph Martin Apple. And if you're careful genealogist and you look at all the information and you can see that this person was a citizen by his father's naturalization before the registrant's majority. So with that information, I was able to narrow down between the census information for naturalization and immigration. I was able to narrow down a very brief window of time where that naturalization could have taken place, which makes it a lot easier to track down those records. So the draft. Birth information can be, or the drawbacks for the draft. Birth information can be incorrect either because it was written down incorrectly by the hurried registrar or men gave incorrect information trying to be younger or older. Many birth records were not available for men to verify their birth information, especially for World War I. Men who signed the cards, and that would have been because a lot of states just did not require birth certificates and record that and make that an easily findable thing until after 1900. Men who signed the card certifying misinformation may have been too nervous to make corrections once the card had been filled out in ink. Some men gave fake addresses to avoid future military communication in relation to the draft. And names can be spelled creatively or as the registrar heard or assumed it was spelled. The registrar's spelling may differ from the signature. So this card here, it shows our Lewis B. Anderson as the registrar wrote his name, Lewis, but when you look down at the signature, you will see that Lewis spelled his name Louis. So this is how he was known. You just never know what's going to happen. So you always want to make sure you're comparing what the registrar wrote and what the individual themselves wrote. So the Selective Services Act. The United States entered World War I on the 6th of April, 1917. On the 18th of May, 1917, the Selective Services Act was passed. President Wilson had allowed the military to raise a voluntary force, but when that proved woefully inadequate, he agreed to military draft proposals. The Selective Services was so named because it was intended to be selective in choosing its military force. Selection was to be those that could best defend the country without disrupting the economic or business interests on the home front. Less than 3 weeks after war was declared, the first draft was conducted. So draft registration. There was a common distrust and dislike of conscription in the United States after its poor and unfair implementation during the Civil War. The War Department brilliantly implemented a plan that interwove basic elements of Americanism and patriotism. Part of that was decentralization, which meant that they brought it down to local people, being run by the local people instead of federally having people come in to get you. So overall, the World War I draft registrations were well received and successful. They were held in the local voting precincts and run by local civilians, many of whom were volunteers. So the people knew these people, or the registrants would have known the people that were running the office. So the first draft registration was held the 5th of June, 1917, and included all males in the U.S. between the ages of 21 to 30 inclusive, regardless of citizenship. Only men already enlisted in military service did not have to register. The registration was completed and reports were available within 48 hours, so it ended up running very well, a pretty well-oiled machine. Now the registration cards, this is what we've been waiting for. So the first draft registration, this is what the cards would look like. This is the front of the card. Later drafts were just kind of a variation on this theme. So let's see the kind of information that might be found here or would be found here. So this is for Reed Vernal Christensen. You can see the name. You can see the registrar spelled it S-O-N. His home address was in Spanish Fork, Utah. And they kind of had information or spots here for more specific information, but that was not included in this one. His date of birth was the 30th of January, 1896. He was a natural born citizen. He was born in Spanish Fork, Utah. He's a farmer by occupation. He was employed by George Hansen. Now that's part of our fan club as coined by Elizabeth Shown Mills, or those friends, family, associates, and neighbors. So here's his place of employment, which is Spanish Fork. He does not have any dependents. He is single. He is Caucasian. He does not have any military experience, and he does not claim exemption. And here is his signature down here, and you can see that he spells his name S-E-N. So the back of the draft card also had information. It was part of the registration. So this one includes the physical description. So it says that his height was medium, his build was medium, his eye color was blue, his hair color was red. He was not bald, and he did not have any disabilities. It does give the registration location, which is in Spanish Fork, Utah County, and then the state of Utah. And it would appear that there are 4 precincts in Spanish Fork. So this is number 4. And then you've got the registration date of the 5th of June, 1917. Now this is a color registration card. This is for Ben Kubelski, better known as the actor Jack Benny. Now getting these cards in color is a little bit more difficult. This one, there's famous people on that are in color on the National Archives catalog website. You can go in and find some that have already been color digitized, but mostly for famous people. So this is one of those. You can see here that this card was printed in black ink. The first registration cards have the most variety and can be the most interesting. There can be a myriad, and that's just because there can be a myriad of inserted numbers, letters, and marks and colors you won't see in other registrations. So this one's unique in that it kind of looks like they had a whiteout thing going on here, and they changed it from his mother being dependent to a no. So he wasn't claiming exemption. But you can see also that we've got colored numbers here, 28 and 31 in blue. We have 97 in red, and then we've got order 8673 and just pencil. So we've got a variety of things going on, and you can get even more going on than this. And then you can have less. So the form characteristics for the front side, you had form 1 on the left, upper left. Then you had registration card in the middle, and then you had the number on the upper right. There were 12 questions, and then there was a tear-off line in the lower left to indicate African descent. Then there was the original signature of the registrant or his designated proxy if he was ill. Or he could sign with an X if he didn't write. So filling in the form, here are the rules and regulations from 1917. Item 14, it says, registrars should be competent clerks whose handwriting is legible and neat. That in item 48, it says, write or print the name clearly. The registrar filled out, so that means the registrar filled out the card. Some are typed, which this is unusual, but most are handwritten, and I would have to say not always in that best handwriting. Maybe legible, maybe not. So the registration number. So by the rules or the registration regulations, again, item 52, it says, last of all, number the card in the upper right-hand corner in one series of your precinct. This is generally the order that the card was filled out in the precinct, and it matched the registration certificate, which I'll show you shortly. Okay, so now for the serial numbers and the red ink numbers. So the serial number was also known as the red ink number. The instructions to the local boards in 1917 said in section 9, each local board should number each and every registration card then in its possession beginning with number 1 and continuing consecutively until all registration cards are numbered. These numbers shall be known as serial numbers and must be entered on the face of each registration card in red ink between the words Form 1 occurring at the left-hand top of the card and the words registration card. So this was done correctly. It's in red ink and it's between Form 1 and the registration card. Want to make note that this registration serial number is not the same as a military service serial number. So just don't get those two confused. So instructions to the local boards in section 9 said, the registration cards should not, for the purpose of assigning such serial numbers, be alphabetically arranged, but must be serially numbered without regard to the alphabetical arrangement of these registration cards. However, the first instructions to the local boards said to place the cards in alphabetical order by surname. So some boards had to rearrange their cards and renumber them once they got the update. Regardless of the cause for the numbering error, there was instruction for corrections. So in item 8, it says if any serial number has to be changed, it must be done by drawing ink lines through the original number and placing the substituted number in the lower left corner above the diagonal line. So you can see here, this one was crossed off, and then the new number, the corrected serial number was placed down here on that corrected line, again in red ink. So color copies and red ink serial numbers. Readily available online copies are imaged from black and white microfilm, so they are in black and white. But the color copies are the ones that reveal these different colors, and you can tell it's the red ink number because it's in red ink, which means it's a serial number. So this one's from Ancestry. It's the back of his card because the National Archives only imaged the front of his card. But the back of his card was on Ancestry, and this is the front, and you can see that you cannot tell that that is red. You can't tell that these two are blue. Is that important? It may or may not be, but I like to know, and I like to have the color. I like color. So here's that back side. There are 6 questions, 3 are numbered. And for your information, the choices for eye color, they only allowed certain choices. It was gray, light blue, light brown, dark brown, or black. There was no green. They later added hazel. The choices for hair color were light brown, dark brown, black, or red. This is the only registration that included a baldness question. And the disabilities can be interesting. So this poor guy, Wilbert Sandel, had 2 fingers off of his left hand. That was noted as his disability. So the first registration card, numbers and marks. So we have these numbers over here that were stamped on. These are called the code serial numbers. The letters A, B, or C placed either before or after the dashed stamped numbers indicated the registration in which the individual registered. So A would have been that first registration. So this has the A in front of it as the first registration. Now the numbers separated by dashes, the first number was the numerical representation of the state. The second number was the district number within that state. And the third number was the local board number within that district. So in our example here, it would be A would indicate the first registration. 21 was the state of Michigan. The 6th is the 6th district board, and 10 is the 10th local board. So this is kind of the order of hierarchy. The top was the adjutant general of the state that was in charge. Then you had district boards that were the next level down. Then you had the local boards, and they were the ones that basically did everything. They did not make decisions on certain exemptions, and if there's an appeal for an exemption, but they did make the exemptions. If there was an appeal for exemption, it went up to the district board, and they did make certain specific exemptions. Now, below the local board were the registration precincts, and that's where the men registered, but nothing else on the cards happened there. The cards were just then collected and taken up to the local board, and this is where most of the things happened, was at that local board level. So the occupation number corresponds to the occupation listed. So you can see here that he's a general inspector for the Cleveland Metal Products, and where is he employed? Platte and Pennsylvania. And it looks like maybe railroads. So here, but not sure. So it's got a 15. So just know, regardless of what other things may be there, this is the occupation, and it's often in blue. This one over here is for a man that's a farmer, Henry Spikerman. This is Martin, their brothers. And he is a farmer, and this one is written the number 1. And number 1 are the farmers. So you'll see, if you have farming ancestors, you'll see this a lot. Now there's the big CA. You might have seen it on some earlier cards. This one's Reed Vernal Christensen. And we've got that big CA across the top. It can be in a variety of places, the CA. It definitely means something. I have my theories about what it means from the research that I've done, but more study and discussion needs to be done. And at this point, there's no consensus in the genealogical community or the military history community for this particular addition to the cards. So there's still more that needs to be done on determining that. So here's another example of a CA. It's down in the corner, smaller, so you can see it a variety of places. Now there's also a C. And again, at this point, there's no consensus for the addition to many of the cards of the C. Again, I have my theories from the research that I've done, but more study needs to be done and discussion. So here's another one where it's a big C across the front and probably in red, often in red. And then there's the mystery X's, and these X's can appear in a variety of different places. You can see here, again, we've got the number 1 for the occupation code for the farmer, but we've got the X's, and I have not found anything consistent with X's. I do not know what they were for. So there's a lot more that needs to be done on that one as far as discovery. Now, copies. The copies won't have the original signature, so you do have to be careful, make sure that you're not, because some originals were lost and copies were put in their place. So you just want to make sure you've got the original. So the duplicate copies, the local board kept the originals and then made a copy and sent it to the Adjutant General of the state. The district boards would then receive the copies for their role in exemptions and appeals. If the original cards were lost, the duplicates took their place. So you can note here, this says this is a true copy. It's been crossed out, and maybe because they needed to use it as the original. But you can see here that the signatures are the same. The handwriting is the same throughout. The slant of the letters, the way that they're formed, the M's are a little bit different on occasion, but for the most part, this is the same signature. This is the same handwriting. Now, registration certificates. Upon completion of registration, after they got that card filled out, the men were given a registration certificate as proof of their registration. They were instructed to keep the registration certificate with them in case they were questioned by local officials. Officials were encouraged to stop and ask men if they had proof of registration to make it more difficult for men to not register. So the first draft registration certificate number you can see here this is Thomas Ilwitzer Reese, and his registration card number is 199. So that was placed on his registration certificate right here. So those should correspond. Now these would only be available in family collections. There wouldn't be a place that would have collected these where you can find these in record collections. But you can see on the back of his card here, Reese has put his serial number 2232, which is right here, 2232. And then this would be his order number, which I think he's put it down as his call number, which is 2253. Interesting that his numbers were so close together there. So the draft lottery. On the 20th of July, 1917, the purpose of the lottery was to place draft registrants in a fair order for military service. The first draft lottery was for 10,500 serial numbers, and they were placed on small pieces of dark bagged paper, which were then rolled and placed in pill capsules. They were trying to make this as fair as possible so nobody could even read through the capsule what the numbers were. The pill capsules were placed in a large glass jar with a 14-inch opening. This became a very famous glass jar. You can see here how that worked. So the numbers were drawn on Friday, the 20th of July, 1917. starting at 9:30 a.m. in the morning and continuing until after 2 a.m. the next morning. The famous first number drawn was number 258, 258. The drawn serial numbers were publicly and meticulously recorded on a master list in the order they were drawn. Different people, famous or notary people, started off drawing them out, and then they just had different people took turns throughout the process. The second and third lotteries, and of course you couldn't see through the capsules, so why they needed a blindfold, who knows? But they did it just to indicate complete fairness and transparency. So the second and third lotteries for this war were conducted in a similar fashion. Order numbers. So order numbers were determined from the lottery. In Selective Service Regulations from 1917, it says, place a check mark after every number in the master list, which at the present appears in the serial number column. So from that lottery, they were able to create the master list of all those numbers that they had drawn in the order that they were drawn. Here's our number 258 at first, and then it was 2522. That was drawn second. So the check numbers were numbered sequentially as order numbers. The order numbers governed the order men would be liable for calls for examination and induction. So over here, you can see that in this particular registration location or board, we had only 1,857 men that were registered. So the numbers didn't go any higher than that. And so they just ignored all of those that were higher than this number and then put a check mark next to them and then placed the order number that they were drawn next to it. Okay, so for their board, this would have been the first one, second one. Now, in this board, they had 4,386 men in that one that registered. So they checked all of these because in the first 33 numbers that were drawn, there were none above this number. So they just checked them all, and these became their order numbers. So I hope that's clear. It can be a little bit confusing. So lower order numbers increase their likelihood for being called up for military service. Those with higher order numbers may still have served, but because they were enlisted. Some realized they were not going to be called up and they wanted to serve. Some with low order numbers may have enlisted to be in a different branch of the military other than the Army. At some point in time, all of the branches of the Army stopped enlisting because it was taking the men from the fields that they needed there, and it was not, the selective service part of this was not working as long as men could still enlist. So for both World War I and World War II, both of them eventually stopped allowing them to enlist so that it could be as a selective service. There were fields or crops out in the fields that were not getting harvested because they didn't have the manpower to be able to harvest them. So order number. Instructions on the placement of the order number is lacking, so it may or may not be included. It is often the other number squeezed in at the top or the bottom of the card. So the example here is, remember, number 252 we just saw, that's the second one. And so this is order number 2. And they've made it in blue ink on this one, or blue pencil, probably on this one. But you know, every local board could do what they wanted, and they may have followed the instructions, they may not have. So it's always fun to try to figure out what they're doing. So order number examples. So here's one at the top. We've got the serial number here, the red ink number, and then they've placed this one in red also, the order number up here, and they're squeezing it in here. This one also is being squeezed in up here, and this is the most common that I've seen, but you can see them a variety of places. So absentees and proxies. If you are going to be absent on registration day, you're expected to fill out a registration card and have it available for the local board on registration day. Now, this registration card was filled out by Hollis Bromley, His registration place was Springville, Utah. And if you notice the date, it was 2 days before the official registration. So apparently he wasn't going to be there on registration day. He knew that and he took action and was in Springville. He went ahead and registered, got it filled out early and made sure it was at the board by the registration day. However, it doesn't appear that Hollis's father got that message because in Mapleton, Utah, on the 5th of June, or registration day, he filled out a card for Hollis. Normally, men that were going to be absentees made sure that they got it there ahead of time. And it was only those that were sick that had proxies come in. So this was unusual. But you can see here, here's Hollis's name. The information similar to what you saw on the other card, but it was filled out by his father, John R. Bromley. So never know what you're going to find. And I would imagine there probably shouldn't have been two cards here because usually they were supposed to be canceled if there were two, but there's two here. So mental hospitals, all men in the given age range residing in the U.S. were expected to register, including those traveling through the country, any alien, the homeless, Native Americans, hospital patients, inmates, you name it, they were all supposed to register. Now, this one is from, it says right here, the state mental hospital. He doesn't know his birth date. He is within that age range. And it does give he claims exemption for being an epileptic. So, and there is his signature. Most likely did not get called up for service and was exempted. The First World War I draft registration and lottery set the stage for subsequent drafts in World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. So here's that famous glass bowl. They kept it and used it in later registrations. And it says the famous glass bowl and the original numbers in the order drawn. So there's those little capsules, and that was what was inside the capsule. This is for the First Army of Sammies. Nearly all had corresponding numbers in all the registration districts, and each drawing called out all men of the same number. For instance, there were about 4,700 of number 258. So in New York City, there are a lot of number 258s. And so they actually spilled out into the streets and had a parade of all the number 258s. So quotas. Based on 1910 U.S. Census data, the quota of men drafted from each state was proportional to the national population. The Provost Marshal General issued quotas to the governors of the states. The governors would then determine the quota from each local board based on the number of registrations that were submitted. The full quota of 687,000 men in the cantonments, or like training camps, was reached in March 1918. So you can go into the census. I don't know if you're aware of this, but you can go in and see the statistics. They are available. So here I'm going to go in and look at those statistics, and it's for Arizona, which is where I'm from. That's my background, is the Grand Canyon, which I'll be in this week. And we've got, you can see males of voting and militia ages for the various ethnic breakdowns. You can see they've got the numbers. They know from 1910 and 1900. And then you can see the different all ages number, age 5 years, under a year. And then you've got in the two different censuses and the males and females and the variety of other breakdowns for ethnicity. So you can see they had a pretty good idea of the numbers that they had the potential to register. And they did it, they were pretty right on. So they did a pretty good job for that. So the call for examination. So they were called for a physical exam. Twice the number of calls for physical examinations were issued to men as the quota required because half were expected to be exempted. Registered men were mailed calls for examination that would specify a date and time, usually within 5 to 7 days, often just referred to as the call. At this point, all men called were given a physical exam, and then they would apply for exemptions. So the physical exam was before any exemptions. As time improved efficiency, moving into 1918, only the men with the classification of 1, which would have been ready for service, were given physical exams. Exemptions. The men in 1917 who passed the physical exam then had 7 days to file a claim for exemption, then 10 days to provide the required affidavits from various people as proof of the exemption. Decisions from the local board, also known as exemption board and draft board, were supposed to be made within 3 days. An appeal could be made if they didn't get the answer that they wanted. Exemptions could be granted for an occupation that supported the war effort. Only the upper level district board could grant those. Designated governmental or military positions, designated federal, state, or city occupations, dependency, a husband with dependent wife or child, a son with a dependent widowed mother, a son with dependent aged or infirm parents, a brother with dependent siblings under age 16. Sorry. Religious convictions or being morally deficient. If you're ever convicted and sentenced, that would mean if you're ever convicted and sentenced for a felony, you would automatically be exempted. So classifications. So seeking a more efficient system, on the 15th of December, 1917, an extensive several-page questionnaire was sent out to all undrafted men, which they had 7 days to complete and return. From these questionnaires, the local board was able to determine which men were needed at home and which were needed in the military. Within 60 days, all questionnaires had been examined and the men's status determined. So they were given a classification number. So this is more of what that classification questionnaire looks like. These are the classification categories, divisions. So the questionnaires allowed the board to determine the status of men regarding military service within a classification system numbered from 1 to 5. Classification 1 meant that men were able to serve. Classifications 2 through 4 meant that they were the deferred classes, and classification 5 meant that they were exempt. During the war, the only men called for service were in Class 1. When the numbers of Class 1 men got low, another draft registration was held to acquire more Class 1 men. So there's something called classification histories or classification ledgers. These provide the history of each registrant from the mailing of the questionnaire and classification to potential appeals, physical exams, and acceptance rejection at a mobilization camp. Now, if they'd already been entered into the military before these classification lists came out and those questionnaires, what are included here may be a little bit more scant, but if it was after that time period, you're going to get a pretty good history for that, them getting called into service and into the camp. So these with the numbers are those. You can see you can see some changes were made, maybe due to appeals and things. There's markings for appeals that could have changed things. So usually these ones are the ones, and you can see this guy, he just went ahead and enlisted. So you've got a variety of things here that you might be able to find out about your registrant. So these are good to get a hold of, and I will explain how to get those shortly. So the classification card. Once a man received his notice of classification, he no longer needed to carry his registration certificate as proof of registration. He was required to carry his notice of classification instead. So that would explain, why he didn't have to go if he was in the lower class and why he was still at home. You can see here, this is one of those classification cards. It's got his order number. This is our Reese, Thomas Illwitzer Reese again, and with those similar order number and serial number, but it's 2253 and his serial number 2232. And you can see from his draft card, that's where that came from. And they correlate. You always want to make sure things correlate. You've got the right person. Then we got his address. So this is where it was mailed, was the address that he had on his card. And the way that they knew it was Bronx is because the second on the back side of that card, that was the city or county that he was from, was the Bronx. So they could fill that in. Then it tells us his classification or his class was 2B, and probably because he had a dependent wife and mother. Okay, so entrainment. In 1917, those men who passed the physical exam and didn't file an exemption, as well as those who didn't show up, were given to the district board as those who were called for military service, and their names were to be published in the newspaper. So be sure to check the newspapers. Once accepted into military service, the men would await their notice to report and be given a date and time with instructions on what they should and should not bring. On the given date and time, the men would meet at the local board where the proper paperwork and transportation to training camps would be provided. This was known as entrainment. War insurance. So military injury and death insurance. There was annual renewable term insurance that soldiers could purchase for the length of the war. The amount ranged from $1,000 to $10,000. The insurance was well received, with 90% insured at the maximum amount by the enrollment deadline of the 12th of February, 1918. The soldier could receive insurance for an injury, or heirs could serve benefits upon his death. So there is a collection that's called the United States Veterans Administration Master Index, and it does have information about those who served and claims were made. So you can see here various things about that collection, but this is a good place to go to just check and see if maybe they did serve. This might give you the indication that they did serve. So I put in my Reed Vernal Christensen, and you can see they never changed that to an SEN. It stayed SON. It says he enlisted on the 19th of September, 1917, and he was discharged on the 10th of October. So he was only in for a few weeks for whatever reason. Aids to deciphering numbers. So there are multiple lists that of various kinds that were created by the local board of these men. If you can't decipher the numbers, it helps to have this kind of a cheat sheet. So you can see here's my Reed Vernal Christensen. His order number was 2. It's kind of hard to read. His reading number was 2322 or 20, yeah, something 2522. Oh, 2522, yes, because he was the second one. And then you've got a variety of other information here, but you can see this is where you can tell where the order number and serial. This for sure shows you what the order number and serial number are, that ready number. These can be located. They can be a little bit tricky to locate. Family Search has some. Look in the catalog or the catalogs. A new one also, or the book collection, digital book collection. State or county repositories, university libraries, historical societies, museums, etc. Here's one from Cabarrus County. I don't know how to say that. I'm guessing in North Carolina. And you can see here's that order number 2 with that serial number 2522 for our Mr. Braswell. And then we got inductions by boards and accepted at camp for number 258, Eunice Holstein, who would have been order number 1, but they did not include the order numbers on this one. But this was in the digital book collection at Family Search. If you notice down here, we've got Robbie Holdbrooks, and he was considered a slacker, and that's what they called those people that did not show up to register or did not show up to get their physical exams and go through the process. So World War I, second draft registration. So that was all about the process, that early process of working through that first draft and how it was going to work. Now they kind of got it figured out. So now we're going into that second draft registration. And or the registrations. So needing more Class 1 men, more draft registrations were held. So on the second registration, it was held the 5th of June, 1918. And due to smaller numbers, the registrations occurred at the local board instead of the voting precinct. For those turning 21, since the first draft. And then you got these birth dates that it would have included. Then there was a supplemental second draft on the 24th of August, 1918. All of the information was included as part of that second draft. And it was for men who turned 21 after that last draft with these birth dates. So the second draft lottery, it was held the 27th of June, 1918. It wasn't for as many men, so they used a little fishbowl. 1,200 numbers were drawn. The first number drawn was number 246. The second supplemental registration used the numbers from this lottery, so no additional lottery was held. So the second registration cards. So they are a little bit different. The general information about them is that they were printed in blue ink. They have the same look as the first draft registration cards, just a different color. And then a thick blue line. This is what makes them very unique, is they have a thick blue line that goes across the top, both the front and the back of the card. And few, if any, extra marks or additions are on here, but every local board did things differently. You never know what you're going to find. So the front, the serial number was on the left here. This would have been the former red ink number, but now it's called just the serial number. It's in the upper left, and then you've got that registration number in the upper right again. You got the 10 questions, then you got that tear-off line, similar again for the African descent, and then you got that original signature, which this one agrees in the spelling. They didn't get that one too far off. Now, on the back of the card is the registrar's report. That's in the middle at the top. Then you've got 5 physical description questions. 3 are numbered. So you can tell this guy is of medium build and medium height. And his color of eyes are blue-gray. They got creative there. And then you got the color of hair, which was brown. Then it's asking if there's any physical disabilities, which there were not. So you'll notice this particular date, if I hadn't mentioned before, it's the same June 5th date as 1917. It's just 1918 now. So they did it exactly 1 year after the first one. Okay, so this could have that supplemental date though. And then they switch now and they're just putting the local board. It's no longer going down to the precinct level that you can see where it was done. It's just the local board that now has the stamp. You don't know exactly which precinct they might have registered in. So for your information, what was new was the father's birthplace. Awesome. The name of the nearest relative. Awesome. The address of the nearest relative, and then the local board stamp that was different. What was removed, whether they were married or single, their occupation and its accompanying number code, whether they had dependents, whether they had previous military experience, whether their exemption was claimed and why. Those questions were removed because now they had the classification or the questionnaire. So the precinct registration location again was removed. So the second registration card, numbers. This one, the order numbers generally were not included. So you'd have to go to a master list or a newspaper article to find those. But they may have been included if the board decided to do that. So you got these, again, the code serial numbers. And again, now we're on the second registration. So you'll see the B here instead of the A that you saw for the first. The number representations are the same. So you've got 37 equals Pennsylvania, and the 7 is the 7th district, and the 5 is the 5th local board. World War I third draft registration. This is the third and last registration. It was held on the 12th of September, 1918. Remember, it was the 5th of June was the last one. Now we're to the 12th of September. There were only 12 days between its legislation and the registration date, so they could pull this off pretty quick now. The location was left up to the local boards, but most did it at the precinct level, like draft number 1, because this was going to be a big one again. It included men between the ages of 18 and 45. 18, they bumped it much younger, and then up to 45 with these birth dates, or those that had failed to register previously. So the third draft lottery. The third draft lottery was held the 30th of September, 1918. There were 17,500 numbers that were drawn, so that's 7,000 more than the first. You can see they're using the same scenario. So the third draft registration cards. Okay, so the general information is they were printed in red. So we were printed in black, then blue, and now in red. They had a different look than the previous registrations. There were no registration numbers. Up in the corner, there's no tear-off line on the lower left. They removed the birthplace of the registrant. They removed the birthplace of the father drat. And they included the name of the nearest relative and their address. And there are generally few, if any, inserts or additions of writing, but the local board could do what they wanted, so you never know. But this is where it's really cool to see the color of these cards because they were in different colors. So the form characteristics on the front is you've got the serial number, or quote, the red ink number. It's called the serial number now. It's on the upper left, and it is in red ink on this one. And normally it is. Then you've got the order number on the upper right. And then you've got 20 questions with the original signature of the registrant. Then you've got these birth dates that it would have included. On the back, you've got the registrar's report, which is in the middle at the top. You've got 5 physical descriptions. And then you've got the disability question. And this poor guy had defective ears and a lame leg. And then you've got the registration date of the 12th of September, which would indicate that third registration if you see this. In black and white, you're not going to see the red as your first clue. You're going to have to go by the date. And then you've got the stamp of that local board again. So the third registration card numbers. The order number was placed where the registration number used to be located. So now we know clearly what it is, and it's included. From the Selective Service Regulations, 1918, Item 69C, it says, for the purpose of identification and to distinguish registrants of earlier registrations who bear the same order numbers, the letter A shall precede every order number assigned to a registrant of the class of September 1918. So not all of them will have this A here, but a lot of them will. And that's just what it's indicating. So here you're seeing some more examples of cards with A's on them, the third registration. So again, those code serial numbers were in the third registration. So now you're going to be seeing the C. And again, this number represented the first one, the state. So we're in Idaho, the second district, and the third local board. So locating World War I draft registration cards, it's not hard. The black and white images from the microfilms are available for free at Family Search. They're available for Ancestry. You've got a subscription, but you can see those at any Family Search Center for free. Fold 3, they're free at the Family Search Center again for Fold 3, usually a subscription. Color images of draft registration cards and classifications. Where do you get those? They are at the National Archives and Record Administration facility at Atlanta. You can order them using this form, and you can just Google that form and it will bring it up for you, and you can fill it out and order them and pay, I think it's around $27 to get both the card and the classification history. But for speed and less money, you can hire a professional. So you can Google NARA independent researchers available for hire, and you can find the page from NARA that they list people for hire. And make sure you're getting somebody for Atlanta. I have used Don Evans, and I highly recommend him. So see his name there, use him. Or you can choose someone else, but I like him. He does a great job. So newspapers. There's lists of men and their order and serial numbers that you can find there. There are a lot of lists. They would include, this was, big news. Everybody was interested. So there was a lot in the newspapers. There's stories about the men, there's articles about the draft. So you can learn a lot about how it worked just by going back into the newspapers of that time. So here's one of the lists that they had. They just put all that master list in here. But I will caution you that I was trying to do research off one of these lists. I wasn't using the original master list, one that was in a newspaper, and I don't know if they shared, which they may have, but I didn't get too far into this where I realized that the numbers were off, and so it messed everything up. So I wouldn't trust these lists. I would go to the original master list that the government provided and look at those instead, and you'll find that in the handout. So here is one where we've got a list from Chattanooga, and we've got our number 258. This is our guy, and this is where he lived. And then our number 252, that second one drawn, Mr. Paris. And then the third one drawn was number 458, and that's Mr. Baker, and he lived on Georgia Avenue. So you can see, just go into the newspapers and start putting your people in, and you'll see if they registered and had those order numbers that were earlier, you might be able to find them, or if they were from a small town. So here's some from Michigan and Lansing. We've got the same kinds of lists. Here's a guy that he's a German, and he's like, okay, yeah, I'll go. But he's with his fiance, and there's a fun story here. And then here's a letter from a guy that's in camp right now. And so you just get more information about that individual, but also about what life was like. World War II. So World War II, I am not going to be covering much about this. I'm just covering draft and draft cards. And so I think you've got the idea of how this works now with the cards. I'm just going to do a quick run through of these cards. And as a genealogist, what you might be looking for. I'm not going to go into history or anything else. Just going to get a quick run up through. So it was the first peacetime draft. Many men enlisted before the draft registration began. By the time the U.S. entered the war, there were over 2 million individuals in the military. This war saw 16 million individuals serve in the military, with over 60% being draftees. Over 10 million men were inducted between October 1940 and March 1947. So that's a lot of men with a lot of records. World War II is the first registration, or its first registration. So it was held the 16th of October 1940. All men ages 21 to 36 residing in the United States, regardless of citizenship status, were expected to register. And then with these birth dates. So first registration cards. Now they switched it from a vertical type card to a horizontal card. It was black printing on a white card. And there's no serial number or order number prefix, which would be here, these prefixes, unlike letter registrations in World War II, and you'll see that shortly. The first one did not have that, and that sets them apart. So there's 11 numbered questions, and it shows the relationship of the person that will know your address, and it increased the physical description options. So from the previous drafts. In World War I. We've got the first registration lottery. Again, they're doing the lottery. 9,000 serial numbers were drawn on the 29th of October, 1940. And like World War I, the order numbers were determined by the order of the serial numbers drawn. You can see here that those capsules were a bit larger, so they had to put an extension on the famous jar they were using. World War II, second registration. It was held the 1st of July, 1941, for men who reached the age of 21 since the 16th of October, 1940. The second World War II draft registration cards. The cards are generally pink in color, and then they have the S prefix. So this is what it looks like, that prefix, and it's S for the second registration. And it's cool to see these pink cards. These are all in color, so these are readily available in color. The form has changed slightly. It asks for a mailing address and unfortunately exchanged the relationship of the person who will know your address with their occupation. So the second draft registration lottery was held on the 17th of July, 1941, same process. The registration was held for the third registration was held the 14th to the 16th of February, 1942, and it was for all men ages 20 to 21 and ages 35 to 44. So we're expanding that age range. So this is what the registration cards look like for the third registration. There was a T serial number now. The birth range was now added to the top of the card. So now that's really nice to see. You don't have to go looking it up anywhere. And the occupation, again, was removed. But you can see the order number and the serial number. That's going to be pretty standard now. That's what they needed to know. So the third and last registration lottery. This is the last lottery they'll have. It was held the 17th of March, 1942. After this lottery, order numbers were determined chronologically by the birthdays of the registrants. If a birthday was shared, the order became alphabetical. So World War II, fourth registration, often called the old man's draft. Why? Because it was for men ages 45 to 64. So that covered a big age range. It was held on the 27th of April, 1942, but it was not intended for military recruitment, but for information about resources on the home front. So it was for men born between these dates listed here. So these are the fourth registration cards, and these unfortunately are the only ones from the World War II that are not in color, available in color readily. They are in the microfilm images that are black and white. You can see here that has the serial number with the U prefix, and that the order number is going to be blank for those that would not have been using this registration for service being called up into service. So you're going to often see this here. This order number is going to be blank. This fellow's 64 years old. They're not going to be drafting him. So he's not going to be getting an order number. World War II, the fifth registration was held the 30th of June, 1942 for all men ages 18 to 20. So the fifth registration cards look like this. They had the prefix number N, okay, and then the date was included up here. You can see this guy moved, so they put in his newer address at the top. So the sixth registration, it was held the 10th through the 31st of December, 1942, for all men who'd reached the age of 18 since the last registration. And this is what the cards look like. They have a W prefix. Okay, so otherwise similar. And then the seventh registration or extra registration was held the 16th of November to the 31st of December, 1943. And it was focusing on American men living abroad, ages 18 to 44. It also included men as they reached the 18th anniversary of the date of their birth on or after the 1st of January, 1943. So these seventh registration cards, you've got that, the nice birth range here, and then you've got a W serial number prefix that was repeated. So locating World War II draft registration cards. So the color images, which are really nice, except for the fourth registration, which is in black and white, those are all readily available on Family Search, Ancestry, or Fold 3. The National Archives catalog actually does have several states or divisions of states available in color, so you'd want to check there for the registrant's name or go by the state. So there's color images of draft registration cards and the classification ledgers available at the National Archives and Records Administration, but this time they're located in St. Louis. So you can use that order number again and Google it, that form, and you can fill it out and you can get the card and the classification ledger. But for speed and less money, I would recommend you hire a professional. And you can do that by Googling, again, that independent researchers for hire at NAR. And I don't have a recommendation for anybody there. Just make sure you're getting it for St. Louis. So then a specialist in those St. Louis records. So newspapers, again, things were in the newspapers. This is my grandfather. And you can see here it's giving the first 18 of the men from Milford are amongst those that are getting those classification forms. So it's showing the first 50, and then the second 50 is the one that my grandfather falls in. So we'll look over here a little bit bigger. So this would have been number 51. This guy down here would have been number 100. So I'd have to count back to get his order number. So 99, 98, 97. So 96 would have been his order number. And when I look at his registration card, sure enough, it correlates. And that's what I always wanted to do, is correlate. So here's that order number, and it's 96. And his card does not show a prefix here. So and with this date, that confirms that this is from the First World War II draft registration, when they didn't have any prefixes and it was held on this date. My grandfather was in the Navy before this. He went back into the Navy and he became career Navy after this. Summary. Every document has a story to tell. The draft registration cards tie our family to critical times in history. The first draft registration cards can be the most complex to try to decipher, but armed with a little knowledge, their full story can be revealed. That knowledge can be applied to later draft registration cards to give them more meaning. Although draft registration cards are readily available for the family historian, acquiring color copies of those imaged in black and white may be desirable. Obtaining the classification ledgers, local board lists, and newspaper articles completes that draft registration story. Are there any questions?